started working in a hospital with young people from 2013 to 14, and then I moved on to doing a master's at UCL in clinical mental health sciences. And then since then, I've worked for 2 years at Broadmoor Hospital and a year with children that have been sexually abused and adopted. From 2018, I've been training as a counselling psychologist and then having different placements in different places. And been lecturing and teaching at Westminster since 2017.
That sounds amazing. Thank you so much. Does Anastasia would like to go next?
Hi, yeah, thank you so much. As Hayden mentioned, I studied my undergrad at the University of Westminster. After that, I decided that I wasn't quite ready for the world of work, so I went on to do a master's in human resource management at the LSE. And then I had to face reality and kind of, try and find some employment, which I can touch on later if helpful, but I actually found that a really stressful transition between education into the workplace. I thought that I could get a job immediately, and it turns out that it's actually incredibly difficult. Faced lots and lots of rejections, I think, as is the way of kind of transitioning from education into employment. And then kicked off my career doing recruitment and development for a law firm, looking after their trainee solicitors and then making sure that they actually qualified, before moving on to work at the Bank of England, where I worked in early careers recruitment for a little while as well, and then got quite involved in the mental health initiatives that they had there, and eventually became the bank's wellbeing lead, which is a very, very rewarding role that I enjoy very much. And I do a couple of things sort of on the side, so I clearly don't enjoy having too much spare time. So I sit on the Commission for Equality in Mental Health with a charity called the Centre for Mental Health, so looking at trying to address policy decisions which contribute to inequalities in mental health and kind of social care and social infrastructure which contributes to poor mental health. And I'm also on a steering committee for a cross-organisational early careers mental health network, so trying to help young people who are either in education and looking for employment or have just started their career to support their mental health while they are kind of going through that very transitionary period. So that's me.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. And Russell, if you would like to also, yeah, amazing.
Hi, thanks Dubaba. Hi everyone out there this evening. Thanks for coming. So my name is Russell. I graduated in 2015 from the Master's Conversion course in psychology. Decided while I was doing that course that I wanted to try for clinical psychology, but very soon realised that it's very competitive, not only to get on the training, but also to kind of get the experience that you need. So I went out and I spent about 2 years doing bits and bobs in and around the NHS in an attempt to scrape together some meaningful experience in mental health services. So I did a load of voluntary things over those 2 years, working in a kind of a clinic for people taking antipsychotics, working as a teaching assistant in a young person's inpatient unit, working as a kind of general volunteer in a London cancer clinic for young people, and then eventually managed to get onto the clinical psychology doctorate in 2017. So I've just qualified as a clinical psychologist, having spent the last 3 years on all sorts of different placements, probably very similarly to Nazanin. And I've just taken up a role in an adolescent CAMS team in London, where basically our job is to keep young people out of hospital.
That sounds absolutely amazing, and congratulations, I guess. So as Hayden's already mentioned, but I'll just reiterate, is that this event today is going to be within 3 different sections. The first section will be about supporting yourself and others. The second will be about working in mental health and well-being, and the third is about different useful resources that are available for the alumni and students. So we'll jump into the first section, which is about supporting yourself and others. And I have a question for you all. Of you, if you could share your own personal experiences and about managing mental health and well-being, and how did you identify your own struggles? Who would like to go first? Should we say Russell? We might as well let you go first. There we go.
Sure. Yeah, well, firstly, I think to say, I mean, definitely one of the most difficult times in my life was doing the masters, because I was trying to do it alongside working, and I really feel for anyone out there at the moment who is attempting to do the same thing, because it just took over my life for a year, and I probably didn't pay as much attention to my mental health as I should have done. I think more recently, the thing that has brought me kind of face to face with this question is that in the second year of the doctorate, my wife and I went through an enormous loss, like completely unexpected and devastating loss of someone close to us. And now grief is not, is not a mental illness. It's not a mental health problem. It's something that everyone's going to go through, but it can be traumatic, certainly. And we know that it's at the root of many people's mental health problems. And, as I went from kind of not being someone who would have identified myself as vulnerable in that respect before, to suddenly struggling to concentrate, struggling to sleep, struggling to talk about what I was going through, experiencing kind of chest pains that I couldn't explain away. And those were the clues, I think, that told me that I just needed everything to stop for a bit. And I count myself very lucky that I was able to reach out to my supervisor at the time and my manager and tell them what was happening, and ask for the time off, really, and ask for the deadlines to be deferred, because it was not easy. It wasn't something that I was used to, but it was what I needed at the time. But the experience of having done it has kind of changed me for the better since. Yeah, so that's my story, but I count myself very lucky that I had people around me at the time that I could talk to about those things.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that I know for me personally, also experiencing grief, it can be quite an intense, and it's even more difficult because when I experienced it when I was during my A levels, and so that was quite a stressful time period. So I completely understand. Who would like to go next? Should we get Anastasia? Is that right?
Sure. Yeah. So I have quite kind of personal experiences with mental health, and I noticed in the chat that someone's mentioned where we talk about anxiety. So I have an anxiety disorder. I have done since I was about 17, although it took me quite a while to kind of figure out what was wrong with me. I was very kind of confused by what I was feeling when I was sort of 17, 18, and I think at the time, that was 10 years ago, and we didn't really talk about mental health so much, so I didn't even really know where to go to kind of find out how to make sense of what I was feeling. And I've also struggled with intermittent depression, and those were really the drivers for me to get into the world of mental health and wellbeing, particularly in workplaces. I've experienced sort of the good, the bad and the ugly of workplaces and how they support mental health and kind of what their cultures are like. And I think that it can make a really, really big impact on people. I feel really lucky to work at the bank. That was kind of the pivotal moment for me. So, I say I've had problems with my mental health since I was 17, but I only started talking to people about it and opening up and, doing things like this a couple of years ago when I did join the bank, because they supported me so much to get treatment for the first time without having to hide it, and, being able to talk about it and explain to people maybe why I'd like to work from home or why I need to go to appointments, why maybe I don't want to be involved with, social situations without people thinking that's because I don't like them. So, the culture of kind of wellbeing and mental health openness really, really helped me with those kind of personal experiences. And I wanted to kind of convert that into being able to create similar kinds of things for other people. It's just very, very much driven kind of by those personal experiences and learning to manage those. And I think that when you keep it to yourself, as I did for a long time, because I was so afraid of what other people might think and how it might impact my career. Even when I was at university, I was really worried about how, if I started telling people, what would they think? Was it going to affect, the grades that I got? I think that openness has helped me to actually feel empowered to think about how do I look after myself? How do I identify the things that set off my anxiety? How do I look after myself when I know that I'm on that downward spiral? So, one of my biggest kind of ways of managing it has been feeling like I can be open about it and kind of give myself the permission to actually do the things that I need to do to feel better.
Thank you very much for that. Sorry, I keep on muting myself because there's fireworks going on outside, so apologies. Completely forgot it was bonfire night. But Nhs, would you like to also fill in, to also contribute?
Yeah, thank you for that. It's really interesting hearing other people's experiences as well, I think. The thing with looking after our mental health, it's an interesting question because I think that we all have different ways that we look after mental health. And I think different things work for different people. And I think this is why I personally find that when we're thinking about how we look after our mental health, it's really good to think about what our preferences are and also how we adapt in situations. I personally find that I've used personal therapy for the past 2 years, and also I used it when I was at Westminster University as well. And I found that to be a very important part of my journey, to have a space where I felt was for me and only for me. And that helped me figure out why I actually want to be a psychologist, or what it is about the whole role that kind of drives me. So I think the whole concept of experiences of how we can cope with our own mental health is very unique to the individual, and it's very specific to cultural context, social context, and different things that we may experience. I've personally have experience of anxiety, not necessarily diagnosed with anything, but I found that I've always been more dealing with the carer role from a young age. So being a carer from my relatives, and that for me was where my anxiety was. And so using personal therapy helped me to understand actually why I want to do psychology and how I can overcome some struggles that I was going through. So like you've all said really, but just giving your permission to do what works for you.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, like as mentioned in the chats as well, for students who are struggling at university and feel like they might benefit from chatting to someone, and yes, we do have a counselling service which is completely free, and I think Anastasia's already mentioned that that's a service that she used as well, and I think that's really, really important. And definitely, if you need that support, then definitely go and get it. I have another question. Obviously, it's now the beginning of lockdown, so this is well timed. How have you all coped through the pandemic, and what impact have you seen on the mental health and well-being of those around you, and even on yourself during the pandemic timing? I keep on forgetting that I need to also say who could go because it's online. Shall we mix up a bit? Shall we get Anastasia to go first?
Yeah, absolutely. As wellbeing lead at the bank, I do tend to get a lot of people who come to me if they do have kind of challenges with mental health generally, and I think that certainly I've seen kind of an increase in people reaching out to ask for support during the pandemic period, and I think that it's a whole variety of things which I think are worrying people at the moment, and that's difficult because you want to help everybody, and there's obviously a limit to how much you can do. We're very lucky at the bank. There's lots of kind of services that we can offer to people. So we do have counsellors as well. We have kind of phone lines that people can call for emotional support. We've got mental health first aiders, which is fantastic. But I think some of the key things that we try to reiterate during kind of particularly the first lockdown period, which I think are easy to forget, is that well-being generally is kind of this complex thing made up of lots of different parts, and there are, it's not just about, you can't just say to yourself, right, I'm going to look after my mental health. That's also to do with your physical health, it's to do with your social health, it's to do with your financial health. So it's about kind of thinking about what are the different things that contribute to how you feel in your own mind, whether you're just going through a period of poor mental health, which isn't necessarily a diagnosed condition, or if you do suffer with conditions such as anxiety disorders, depression, etc. So it's things like, particularly now the days are being shorter, there's more darkness, it's a bit colder and grayer. It's still finding the time to get outside, going for a short brisk walk, get your heart rate up. That can help with serotonin levels. But also there's some evidence to suggest that being out in nature and seeing some trees and grass is actually beneficial for your mental health as well. It's also thinking about, financial well-being. It's not about how much money you have, but it's about how kind of secure and in control of your finances you feel. That can have a huge impact on how you feel in terms of your mental health. So I think that it is about kind of, making some proactive steps to think about the different portions of your life that you can obviously try and balance. I appreciate that's easier said than done. You can't just say, I'm going to take control of everything and suddenly magically everything's going to be better. So I think there's also a little bit of acknowledging the fact that the situation we're in is really challenging and it's hard, and if it makes you angry, if it makes you upset, or if it makes you frustrated, that's okay. Don't deny yourself the kind of ability to feel whatever you're feeling, but I think it's also about kind of not trying to allow that to develop into kind of a cycle of really, really constantly negative thought, and thinking about what are the things that I do that I love, that make me feel good, that I know are good for my well-being, and are going to kind of bring together some of those different aspects that might help my mental health as well.
Thank you so much. Mental health first. My words are all going all over the place. Mental health first aid is actually something that is new at Westminster as well. So a lot of lecturers and I myself as a first aider as well. So that's something that can reassure students as well on the call, that if you do go through anything, then there are first aiders on campus or over the phone that can help and support you, who have been trained. So thank you very much for that. Russell, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah, I count myself very lucky in that my work didn't change a great deal. I was actually, for much of the lockdown period, working in a prison, and we were on site pretty much as usual, although that's kind of changed now in my new role. And for much of the year, I found myself spending more time at home, being able to be with my wife more, being able to do the kinds of things that kind of sustain me. I think it's completely different for anyone who was already in a position of vulnerability. So people who are already facing economic uncertainty, people who are having difficulty accessing services, people who are lonely and isolated. All of these things that we know impact on people's mental health have just been exacerbated, I think, by this difficult year that we're having. And I imagine it will be a little while before we know exactly what the impact of the pandemic has been, but my sense is that we'll probably see that the kind of gap, the inequality gap, has widened and worsened the mental health of people that were already vulnerable. In CAM services, we're seeing that a lot of young people were kind of relieved of the pressures of school and probably university for a number of months of the year. We're now seeing a big kind of influx of referrals as people are meeting those challenges, those stresses again at full tilt. But we also know that school is a refuge for a lot of young people who maybe kind of don't have food on the table at home, are experiencing or witnessing domestic violence at home. So it's been a really challenging year, I think, for young people, and we're only now starting to see the full effect of that in services.
And that's something that actually today I was speaking about with the relevant individuals around making sure that we are providing services, or at least signposting students who might be in unsafe homing environments, because the government currently their stance is that we should all be staying at home, but for a lot of people that's not possible. And so that's something that we're going to try and make sure that we're able to send out communications out for students who are in unsafe homing environments that need support and have and all of that. So that's something we're currently working on. So thank you very much for raising that. Nhs, would you like to go next?
Yeah, you guys have kind of covered a lot of it, so I won't repeat anything that's been said, but I just feel like the impact of it has been quite similar in a different way to what Russell had said at the beginning, that it's a grieving process. I think personally is that we're experiencing a loss, and we will process this loss very differently, and that loss not necessarily being through a bereavement, but the loss of the grief that we have is through a change of life, restrictions, things that we can't possibly do anymore. The access that we have to our day-to-day life, suddenly we've got a pandemic which is telling us, well, you might be putting yourself at risk or people you love. So then there's responsibility with that. So there's a lot of for each individual, there may be different types of impacts that it could have, and different types of vulnerabilities can actually come at play here. Particularly knowing that, well, we don't have any control over it. And if we think about anxiety, often we experience anxiety knowing we don't have control over things. So I can imagine that the impact in itself is quite huge and quite different and distinct for each individual. But I've personally been treating it like a loss. It's definitely felt like a loss to me that I can no longer do what I used to do. I don't know, 9 months ago, I have to go by what the service is telling me to do now, or what the university is telling me to do now, or what my family expect me to do. So there's so many expectations as well. So that's been my personal experience of how the impact has been.
That's such an interesting perspective on the way to deal with the pandemic, and thank you very much for that. That's the first time I hear anyone say that, so definitely going to use that more. So I guess the last question for this section is going to be about what advice would you give for the students and the alumni in terms of supporting others around them, around when it comes to their mental health, but also how can they support themselves as well. Who should go first? Russell?
Sure, yeah. I mean, I think it's about asking other people how they're doing, really. I mean, I think if I was to give people one piece of advice on how to support other people around them, I think it's pay attention to people, trust your instincts when you think that people aren't doing as well as they normally would be, and ask twice. And if someone does open to you and let you know that they're struggling, you need to keep that mode of communication open, I think. And keeping people in mind is a really powerful thing. It sounds like a very simple thing, but just to reach out and let people know that you are thinking about them is something that is vital, even with people who are in the most extreme states of distress. So that, I think, is what I would say about supporting other people. In terms of supporting yourself, to come back to what Nhs was saying, it's completely personal, isn't it? Anastasia mentioned, I think, exercise, getting out in nature. We know absolutely diet and sleep are really important. But I think I kind of like to pose a question to the people that are out there listening, which is, when do I feel most myself? Ask yourself that question. When do I feel most myself? And if I was only allowed to do one thing for the rest of my life, or there was only one thing I could do under lockdown, what would it be? And I think the answer to that question probably tells you something about your values and something about what it is you need to be doing to sustain yourself at the moment. And that's the thing that you need to prioritize and give permission to yourself to do.
Thank you so much for that. Anastasia, would you like to add anything?
Yeah, I mean, definitely echo what Russell was saying. I guess just to build on kind of that point around checking in on each other, I think one of the best ways that we can recognize if someone is struggling is not by kind of, looking at, assuming how someone might act if they're struggling, because the responses to a decline in mental health are as individuals we are as people. So some people may lash out, be angry, be more extroverted, be more introverted. I think it's just about maintaining some regular contact, which just allows you to see where people's behavior changes, which might be the indication that something's wrong. So even if it's just a regular, what are you up to today? Or how's X going? How's Y going? How's your mum? How's your sister? Whatever it might be. It's just through those kind of regular interactions that you start to notice, for example, if someone has been teaching themselves to play the guitar during lockdown, that's been bringing them loads of joy, and suddenly no mention of it. Is that change because, actually they're just really struggling and they can't pick themselves back up? And that might be a good moment to, really try and kind of probe around, are you okay? Can I help? Is there something I can do? So yeah, I think that kind of regularity of contact is really helpful in kind of keeping an eye out for those things. I think in terms of looking after yourself, I've noticed in the chat that there's some conversation around kind of it's when you do nothing that you kind of start to implode, which can be true. But something that I would just say, which I think has been difficult for me, certainly kind of in the first lockdown, is that I think on social media in particular, what I saw lots of was people saying, use this as an opportunity, teach yourself a new language, or, write a novel. And I think that give yourself the permission to just do what you need to do that doesn't have to be productive, because I think that this is such a tense and difficult situation. What you don't want to do is burden yourself with these expectations of, I should be achieving something, because honestly, I think that it's just enough to get through and get by and survive and look after yourself. And if you don't come out learning 3 new languages, I'm with you, and it's absolutely fine. Just focus on doing the things that make you happy. So don't make yourself kind of too pressured to come out as, ready to be the next Prime Minister. It's fine if all you do during this lockdown is just care for yourself.
Honestly, I remember I was stressing out, but I was stressing myself out because I was like, oh God, I'm not being productive during this lockdown. I'm not doing anything. I'm just sitting down. I was relaxing, self-care, just watching Netflix. And then I see everyone on their stories. Oh, I've baked this cake today. Oh, I've read this book. And I'm like, oh God, this made me feel horrible. So no, I completely 100% relate to that. And I'm sure many others among the students and everyone watching can as well. Nhs, do you want to add anything else?
I think they've covered it, but just 2 words as they were as both Russell and Anastasia were talking came to mind, is compassion and self-compassion. So just be compassionate towards other people, try and understand, be accepting if whatever goes on, just that the whole idea of compassion and self-compassion came to mind. And also there's a saying that I always say is, doing nothing is doing something, because whilst you're doing nothing, you're actually taking care of yourself in the way that works for you. So this expectation, the pressures that we have, sometimes it's kind of self-created as well as created within society. But be compassionate towards yourself whenever you are having these expectations.
Amazing. Thank you so much. And as I think it was already mentioned in the chat, I'm going to mention it again. Students, you can sign up to Look After Your Mate training, which is organised by Student Minds and in collaboration with the university and the student union, where we'll be providing you with the right skills to be able to look after your friends and making sure you can see the different signs. All right, thank you so much. So I guess we'll be moving on to the next section, which is about working in mental health and well-being and around the stigmas around it. Russell, this question is for you. You are interested in how striving to achieve our career ambitions can both support and challenge our mental health and well-being. Could you please expand on that?
Yeah, of course. So I actually trained as an actor originally. And then I came out of drama school. I spent kind of 7 years working as an actor alongside getting into education as a private tutor. And then I made the decision to do the masters and to train as a clinical psychologist. And I think to begin with, I thought that these were 2 completely separate professions. In fact, I probably kind of separated them deliberately in my mind. But what I realized more and more as I spent time with people who were training as psychologists is that they were very similar to the people I've met as actors, because they often had this desire to become a psychologist from very early on in life. So this might be something, an ambition that they'd harbored since their teenage years, and it had actually become quite bound up with their identity. And so achieving in the course was kind of like a certain sense of identity coming to fruition. And I'm sure that's not unique to those 2 professions. That's certainly something we'll find in other healthcare professionals and all sorts of different jobs too. I think there are upsides and downsides to that, right? So, first of all, if we can find something that we want to do, find something that we have a drive to do, an ambition to do, a vocation, then that actually helps us to navigate something that we need to do in our kind of adolescence and early adulthood. We need to find some sense of identity in the world. We need to go out and separate from our family. We need to find a sense of who we are in relation to other people, what our role is. And it can also sustain us through some really difficult times. So when I was slogging through my masters at Westminster, it was the thought of who I was going to be in the future that was helping me to do that. But I also think that there are some potential problems that arise from the same sources, because if your job, your ambition or your vocation is bound up with your identity, then actually what happens when we fail at work? What happens when we fail the exams, or we don't get the job, or we lose the job, or we can't work because of illness? There's a danger in the worst case there that we'll actually feel as if we're kind of coming apart, falling apart at the seams. The other question I think is, well, what if there's a voice in our head telling us who we're going to be in the future? is that voice a kind voice? Is it a compassionate voice? Or is it the voice of a critical teacher? You know, and we may even find that if we look back into our past, we can identify exactly whose voice it is spurring us on. So I guess there's a danger that our ambition or our profession can not just be the thing that keeps us together, but it can also be a stick that we use to beat ourselves with. So I guess it's about always keeping in mind that question of who else am I other than this career that I have in mind, and how can I be kind to myself while I'm striving to achieve it.
Thank you very much for that. Anastasia, the next question is for you. Working as a wellbeing lead for such a large and corporate company, could you please provide some insight into the type of initiatives you are involved in to support your colleagues?
Yeah, so I'll actually kind of say that I think that the bank is probably less corporate than people realise, which I think is a really lovely part of why, you know, you have a culture where people can be open about, you know, their mental health or disabilities, invisible disabilities, culture, heritage, background, any of the things that make them who they are, you know, that aren't just confined to the workspace. So I think we try not to be too corporate, and I think that we've achieved that quite well. We have got lots kind of in place at the bank in terms of kind of mental health support, and some of it is more formal, so things like providing private medical insurance for colleagues, which includes cover for mental health treatment, so if they need to be referred for counselling, therapy, whatever kind of treatment, you know, it's found that they need, that can be covered by the bank, so you don't have to worry kind of about the financial burden of seeking private healthcare. We have counsellors on site, so we actually have colleagues who are inside the bank, they're bank colleagues like us, they're fully qualified counsellors, which is fantastic. But also we try to do informal, so, you know, I think we've kind of touched on this a little bit, but mental health is a spectrum, right? So you've kind of got the diagnosable mental illnesses that maybe you will have in your lifetime, maybe you won't. But even if you never do, your mental health is kind of on ups and downs. You know, you will have periods of poor mental health, you might have periods of good mental health. A really good example, you know, Russell touched on bereavement. We're all going to do bereavement at some stage, and more likely than not, it's going to result in a period of poor mental health for you. Doesn't mean you'll be diagnosed with something, but it is a period of poor mental health. And we try and do informal things where people can share some of those experiences and go through the ups and downs of life and what it does to their psychological well-being. So things like we have something called peer support. So colleagues who have been through various difficult things in life, from losing children to fertility issues to complex disabilities to complex bereavements, and they share their profiles and they say, this is my experience. If you want to talk to me about it, if you're going through something similar, I am here for you. We give training around, you know, having productive conversations, staying safe in conversations, and also how it can get people to kind of more formal support. But what it means is that if you're going through something really tough, and, you know, I'm sure that we've all had that kind of feeling of, I am alone in this. And even if I'm not, I don't know anyone who's been through this, and I don't want to reach out, and I don't want to burden someone. And so when you've got these kind of peer supporters who say, here's my experience, I am literally telling you, I am here for you. Email me, call me, message me, whatever you want, and we'll talk about what you've been through. I will listen, I won't judge. And then if you want, I'll share my experience. And if you want, we'll talk about what your next steps and options are. So it's really about kind of creating those human actions, because, you know, you can tell people, call this number and they'll give you an appointment to see a doctor, and that's fantastic. But I think it's more about kind of creating that openness. And I won't kind of go through absolutely everything that we do, because I know that this isn't, I'm not intending to kind of do a sales pitch for the bank, don't worry. But one of the really lovely things that we've done, and if you'd like to have a look, it's on our website. We do films which are called This Is Me, and it's where colleagues share their mental health experiences in kind of videos, and they talk about some of their worries about mental health. They might talk about some of the things that they do to kind of get themselves feeling better, and it's a really nice way to kind of showcase that whether you are really senior or whether you're very new to the organisation, it's okay to share your story, and that's been a really nice kind of storytelling piece to kind of empower people to be able to talk about mental health in the workplace without, you know, feeling like they don't have the empowerment to do that. So those initiatives have really been lovely, and yeah, I think it's just about those human elements and kind of really making it very clear that we don't just care about mental health because it's a clinical issue or because, it affects the work that we do, but because we care about people as other humans as well.
Thank you so much. And then for clarification, of course, you work at the Bank of England. I saw that question somewhere. Okay, so for Nhs, what are the most important pieces of advice you can give to those wanting to pursue a career in mental health and well-being?
Well, I'll start off with saying just take your time. It's so important for you to just be able to learn and experience, and for you to kind of be able to learn through time, not through I have to complete this by this date. I mean, there's again, particularly with the doctorates being so competitive, it feels like it's a race where we have to get on as soon as possible. But actually, everything we do prior to getting onto the doctorate is a part of our doctorate. It's a part of our journey. It's a part of our process. So it's really important to take your time and experience, learn what you like, what you don't like, and in that process reflect, understand more about yourself, more about what you're doing, why you're doing it. And at the same time, I mean, we've mentioned self-care a lot as well, but also have a social life. I know that in my journey, and a lot of the people that I studied with that wanted to become psychologists, it's like they put their whole life aside and all they wanted was to be a psychologist and nothing else mattered. But actually, it's really important for you to travel, for you to enjoy life, for you to have different, because I mean, Russell touched up on it about your identity. And if one part of your work identity isn't going as planned, it could really have an impact on our mental health. It could really have an impact on how we feel about ourselves. So have different parts of you that create your whole identity, as opposed to just having your career be your identity. And also, if because I know that there's this a lot of the students that I work with, particularly, they really want to be a psychologist, but it's very focused on specific routes of psychology. Whereas to work with people, you don't have to be a psychologist only. You can work as a psychotherapist. You can be a counselor. You can teach psychology at a PGC for schools. There's so many different ways that we can be advocating and talking about mental health and working with mental health, apart from just being a psychologist. So just branch out, reach out, see what works for you. I would probably say it's really important, because at this level of whether it's undergraduate or postgraduate, not knowing where you want to go, it's the experience and the time that really allows you to figure out what works for you. So that's probably my biggest advice. Yes.
Thank you so much. That actually nicely goes into my next question, because I was going to say that, there's clearly still a stigma around mental health conditions. So I was going to ask you all, the whole panel, what is your advice for helping to eradicate that, and what can we all do to help? So, of course, Nhs, you've already sort of mentioned, being teaching, all of that. So is there anything else that you feel we could do to eradicate that stigma? Who would like to go first? Russell?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're heading in the right direction, aren't we? And it feels like it is becoming easier to talk about mental health. The work that Anastasia was talking about at the bank sounds just fantastic. I think for people to be able to put out there, this is something that I've experienced, whether it is something diagnosable or whether it is a very difficult human experience. I mean, I think if the ultimate goal of reducing mental health stigma is for more people to be able to ask for help when they need it, then I think we need to have more diverse conversations around distress, really. I mean, I think that the system that I work in, the NHS, tends to medicalise distress, which is very often understandable, flows from traumatic experiences and losses. There are other ways of understanding the distress that people might be going through. So not everyone who is persistently sad thinks that they have depression. Not everyone who has unusual experiences thinks that they have psychosis. There are other ways of talking about these things. And I guess I would like to see a system where we can have more diverse conversations around those things. I think that would put us one step further along the road to having more conversations and less stigmatized ones, even if it's not everyone buying into the language that we're currently using.
Thank you so much for that. Anastasia, is there anything else that you feel like we should do to try and challenge this stigma?
Yeah, so I think kind of definitely kind of building on what was said already, I think I could probably talk about this topic for a long time. I think there's lots of stigma still existing. I think we've loads of progress, which there's still some way to go, and that can be approached from different angles of society and education kind of infrastructure that we have. What I wanted to kind of pick up on though was, I guess from some of the kind of core of my experiences is around organisations, because I think that employers have a really big impact on society and the way that we view things and the way that individuals view things. And what I would say, and I know that this is easier said than done, but if you are studying now and you're thinking about where you might like to go to work, or if you're currently in employment and you're thinking about what your next steps might be, I think that there's a lot of power in, looking for those organisations that can show you evidence that they've made steps to address mental health. I think that it's very easy to put on a website that we care about mental health, but if you can't see the tangible things that people have done to actually work towards that, because I think that what will tend to happen over time is that organisations will realise that they're missing out on the talent, and that's you guys, and they want you to work for them, they want, bright young people and, people of all ages, but, particularly when you're kind of coming out of education in the start of your career. And they're going to realise eventually that if they don't start making a change to how they address organisational mental health, how they look after their people, that they're going to miss out on that top talent. So I think that there's definitely some, messages that you can send by the choices that you make. And I think that, touching slightly on what kind of Russell said earlier around how we kind of attach our value to things like our career, sometimes we can be kind of encouraged to think that you have to have a certain name on your CV, or you have to have gone a certain route in your career. But I think that you'll find that if you go to an organisation, even if it's not, this huge, multi-billion international corporation, but what if it's, a startup, for example, or if it's, something small or something that's community-based, but that is an organisation that's going to look after your mental health, you're going to be happier, but you are also going to start sending messages to organisations that aren't keeping up the pace. And I think that the more businesses that really start thinking about how they address mental health in the workplace, that's going to spill over into other elements of society as well. And I think that that will be one of the many ways that we can kind of try and address some stigma, but that's just the one that I think I'm probably most familiar with, so I wanted to touch on it.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think for the first thought I came with, how do you differentiate between an organisation that genuinely cares about their colleagues' mental health and one that is tokenizing it? I'm not sure if anyone would be able to answer that, because that's something for me as well. When I start applying for jobs and I'm looking for jobs, I would love to be able to get some solid information on how the employer is dealing with individuals' mental health. But sometimes I feel like that can be tokenized. So sorry, I know I've gone completely off the script, but that's just an initial, and I'd love to hear what your thoughts are. How do we know when it's genuine? I don't know if anyone wants to answer that.
Do you mind if I jump in on that?
Yeah, of course.
So I'll say that, there are easier and harder ways to do that. One of the easy ways is to jump in on some of the social media feeds. So, if all they're posting about is, I don't know, their commercial success, and, you can't see anything about their people, then that can send you a signal. Not necessarily, the be all and end all, but, have a look, do they do things like marking World Mental Health Day? Do they kind of do any initiatives like mental health first aiders? Equally, I'd say, make use of things like this. So you have in front of you, alumni who are now working, in organisations, which, I mean, obviously kind of inherently for Russell and Nazanin, but, through events like this, you have an opportunity to speak to people who can tell you a little bit about their insight of an organisation, the experiences that they've had. So make use of the kind of, what the university can offer you. Even with the careers services, they have a lot of insight into what organisational cultures are like, and they can give you some advice. But also, there's things like wellbeing and mental health charters. So it's just become defunct, but there used to be something called the Time to Change pledge, which employers could sign if they committed to action around changing the way that mental health was approached in workplaces. have a look at that list, because there's a lot of demands when you sign something like that. So it's called the Time to Talk pledge. I've just noticed in the chat someone's asked. So if you look that up, you know, they have to agree to certain actions and terms if they want their name on this pledge. And so you know that they've got stuff going on to address what they've set. And it's the same for lots of other things, not just mental health. So depending on the kinds of things that you're passionate about, you know, there's a lot of organisations that are working towards better diversity, better representation, better disability support, and there's lots of different pledges that you can look up where they've, you know, they have to fulfil actions to stay on that kind of list. So have a look at those, and they'll give you an indication of the kind of organisations that are taking this stuff really seriously.
Thank you, that's really, really helpful. Does anyone else want to add to that? Nope. Okay, amazing. Thank you so much. Oh, sorry, did you want to jump in, Russell? Oh, perfect. Okay, so I guess we'll be going on to the next section, which is about useful resources, and I think we've sort of covered it now throughout the panel, where we spoke about Time for Change, which is already on the chat. We spoke about training that students could sign up to, which is for looking after your mate. And of course, Hayden will also provide, will send information and links to everybody around resources within Westminster, so you can access our counselling services, the wellbeing advisors, but also externally as well. But I might as well ask, is there any other resources you feel like that we could also include and talk about? Who would like to go first? Should we say Nhs?
Yeah, so I think a couple of resources, but I believe that these should be up, would be charities like the Samaritans. I think there is a list that the university provide on the on their website. If I'm not wrong, probably Hayden's the best person to go to, but there are charities, and again, there's loads of other charities, because we're speaking specifically about mental health, but there might be different types of challenges or struggles the students may be going through, and that there will be a list that would be provided by the university that could ad hoc provide it. The university also provide, I mean, I use the service at the university for personal therapy, which I had for 12 sessions in 2012. And then I moved on to, you know, you can always have GP referrals. There's different routes, which Hayden just wrote that he will put some links up there anyway. So that was for me, yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Russell, would you like to add a couple of things?
Yeah, I sent a couple of links through to Hayden. I don't know if he's going to put them up now or put them in the kind of resources list later. The first one was just that I became aware of the Nhs Apps Library recently, which is a kind of list of things that I'm allowed to recommend to the people that I see. And there is just loads of good kind of mobile phone based apps on there for helping to manage your mental health. So there's like mood trackers on there, there's kind of thought diaries, there's sleep apps, there's an app where you can kind of create a piece of music to express how you're feeling. So get on there and have a look what there is. I think if, you know, I'm very keen on anything that's on a mobile phone, because it's something we're all glued to. You know, it's not something you need to go and find at a critical moment. The other thing I wanted to flag up was an organisation called Integrate Mental Health. And that is a campaign started by a clinical psychologist called Natalie Kemp, who had a period of severe depression in 2015 while she was practicing as a clinical psychologist, and was really disappointed with the reaction that she had from the people around her at the time. So she has started Integrate to kind of push for mental health professionals to be able to talk more openly about their lived experience, and for the systems around them to value that experience. So if you head to their website, that's gr8 mentalhealth.com, you can see her talking about her experience and lots of other mental health professionals as well. And I just wanted to flag that up for anyone who maybe has their own experiences of mental illness, but would like to forge a career in helping professions.
Thank you so much, Dan. Literally all the resources that you've just spoken about has been put in the group chat as well. So if anyone wants to check out the websites, then you can on the chat box. Anastasia, is there anything else you'd like, any other resources you feel are really important for our students and alumni?
Yeah, so I mean the list that's been posted I think is very comprehensive. I guess the only other one that I would mention, which I don't think has been mentioned so far, is that there's a charity called Student Minds. So particularly kind of specifically for people who are still studying, it just helps with kind of some of those quite specific challenges. And the other one that I'd mention is Calm. So they're a charity looking specifically around suicide prevention, but they do a big focus on male mental health. And I know that in the chat earlier there was some conversation around kind of some of the stereotypes around masculinity, which sometimes can prevent people from speaking up about how they're feeling and what they're going through. So Calm is really good from that perspective, because they really do consider the male perspective there as well. So I would definitely recommend, just where you've got a spare 5-10 minutes, have a look through all of the links that have been sent, because even if you feel great now, you never know when a friend might open up to you and say that they're struggling, and it's useful to know what's available so that you can kind of you don't have to go back through your emails to check. Something will be left in your mind and you can kind of signpost them to it.
Yeah, it's amazing that you actually mentioned men's mental health, because it's November and it's now the Movember campaign, which is specifically on men's mental health. And at the Student Union, we're holding a series of events and workshops and specifically looking at men's mental health. So definitely, if there are any students who are interested, then please do sign up for the different events and workshops that we are holding. And I guess now we will, unless anyone else has any other resources that they'd like to include and speak about. No? Okay, I guess we can go to the Q&A, which I believe Hayden will take over. I think so.
Yes, sorry. I'm too busy looking at the questions. Just trying to share my video. It is playing ball now. There we go. So huge thanks to all of you. I mean, it was quite touching seeing all of the chat. To be honest, even talk of a WhatsApp support group and things like that. So it's amazing to see so many questions for you guys, as well as just generally people supporting themselves and sharing their experiences. But a huge thanks. I'll thank you more, but to the panel and Julia Barber, it's been brilliant, so insightful and everything. We've had a lot of questions, so we've got a good amount of time for them. So I think I will put a few that are specifically for some of the panel members first. So I think, Anastasia, you touched on your personal experiences with anxiety a bit, so forgive me if it's a case of you repeating some things, but someone has asked, what support did you receive specifically for your anxiety?
Yeah, so I've been through CBT, which is cognitive behavioural therapy, which I know that there's been some talk of it on the chat, and that was kind of to try and address what some of the kind of root causes were around my anxiety, and why it was coming up and what were some of the triggers and how could I kind of try and bring myself out of that. That's worked to a degree for me, that has really helped, but also partly I think I've tried to learn a little bit more about myself and the things that make me feel better when I am anxious, and I think, to be honest, the most valuable thing that I've learned about my anxiety as sort of a way of coping is being able to say no without feeling guilty. So whether that's, I used to feel very pressured to do social things. If someone invites you somewhere, I felt like I always have to say yes, when in reality, when you have anxiety, sometimes you really don't want to get on the tube and you don't want to go somewhere and you don't want to sit and talk to anyone, and then you get there and then you regret going, and if you don't go, you get massive FOMO, fear of missing out. And I kind of told myself, you know what, I'm going to put myself first and I'm going to start saying no to things. And that was really helpful for me, because it just meant that I wasn't pressuring myself to do things. And that's also in the context of, again, I don't know, maybe some of the listeners will kind of resonate with this, being able to say no when people ask you to do things or when people ask you to help with things. I'm not an unhelpful person. I love helping other people. It's partly why I work in wellbeing, but it's also kind of, realizing for yourself that it's okay to say no to things so that you can prioritize yourself. So I think probably the therapy let me get to a stage where I was able to sort of think about myself and kind of my self-care in a way, because I think when you are anxious, it's how can you think about what's going to help you, you know, because it makes you anxious to think about, you know, doing things differently or kind of looking after yourself, or making time for yourself as well. So I think that the therapy was kind of the key point to let me get to kind of quite an introspective place where I could think about some of that stuff.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. Oh, sorry, Lubaba.
Sorry, can I jump in on that as well? Is that okay?
Of course.
Yes. Yeah, I also wanted to say that if for students who might be already registered with the disability team, that they should also register with the student finance disability support team as well, because I know, like for me, because I'm diagnosed with depression and anxiety, and throughout my university experience I had a mentor which was funded by student finance, and they were able to like support me throughout my, like I would meet them on a weekly basis. They supported me throughout my journey, and I think that's definitely something for students who are diagnosed with any type of disability. Then that support was very, very beneficial for me. So I just thought I'd jump that in.
Great. I can relate very much to this also. My brother and I suffer with anxiety quite badly. And unlike me, my brother does have a very corporate job. He's a commercial buyer at Tesco. And I think the pressure he feels for lots of sort of wining and dining and entertaining clients, he's got a particular specific anxiety around food, which doesn't help. But I think, it's clear that so many people have this, and if you can identify others, I'm lucky I have my brother, so we can talk about our anxiety. We're quite close in that sense, but trying to find other people is key. So let's have a look. Nhs, do you have any advice for declaring mental health disorders when doing job applications? Quite a specific one.
Yes, so I think that is something very personal, and I think it also depends where you're applying to, if it's a requirement that you need to say. I know that I have personally found it helpful to, so I've just been diagnosed with dyslexia, and I find it helpful to declare that I've got dyslexia. I know that I also have something called prolactemia, which one of the symptoms is you can get a bit depressed, and it depends. There's two ways. There's one way of declaring it as part of your application, and that's a very formal way of declaring it. And another way is declaring it through speaking to your manager about your difficulties. And I think there's a bit of a difference there, is that if an organization is asking you to declare it, I personally have never come across any organization that's asked me to declare it or declare anything apart from a disability. However, in my roles in different places that I've worked, I have always told my supervisor that I sometimes might feel certain ways, or I might struggle with something, or there's an added pressure, or I'm a carer for a relative. So I have declared that. Again, this is a very, very personal choice, and it would go down to the individual and the organisation. I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything to that, but that's my personal experience.
No, I mean, I would just add that the law is on your side. It's obviously worth knowing that since 2010, if you have something, a diagnosable mental health difficulty that could be classed as a disability under the Equality Act, then your employer should not disadvantage you, and they should make reasonable adjustments to make sure that you can do your job. Now, I was also looking at some figures from Times Change this morning that said that about 80% of people now say that they'd be okay working with someone with a mental health difficulty, which is pretty shocking to me, that 1 in 5 people still say that they wouldn't. So, coming back to what Nazanin was saying, it's understandably very personal, the choice of whether people feel comfortable declaring that sort of thing in the workplace, and it will depend on the person, the difficulty, and whether you feel like you can trust the people around you.
Great. And Russell, we've got a couple of questions which are about the a very personal loss that you mentioned. So, of course, goes without saying, whatever you feel comfortable with sharing. But a couple of questions linked are: how much time did you take off after suffering this loss? Person who asked it also suffered a similar loss whilst at work, and their manager at work did not know how to support them, including their dyslexia. And the second part of that is, how did you actually overcome physical manifestations of your grief, such as chest pains, long-term and immediate? I've thrown a lot at you there, so I can always repeat some. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear that people have been through those things. I think I probably took kind of 3 or 4 days off at the time, a couple, in the immediate, a couple around the time of the funeral, and then, God knows how many days I just sacked off and kind of went out for the day and just tried to be very kind to myself around those things. I mean, the NHS has a compassionate leave policy, and I took full advantage of that, and I was lucky, as I said, that I felt really well supported by my manager, my kind of official manager, and by my clinical supervisor at the time. I don't think there's any right or wrong amount of time to take off. I mean, I think that I definitely would say you need to find the way to give yourself the space that you need to process what you've been through. In terms of overcoming that, I mean, I was lucky that I'd been in personal therapy for about 3 months at the time that this happened. I thought that I would be in therapy for about 6 months to a year, and I'm now in therapy nearly 2 years later. And it's hard for me to imagine a time when I won't need that space for myself. In terms of, those physical manifestations and all the other kind of symptoms, if you will, of grief, I told the story of what had happened in therapy, I think, and I gradually pieced it together. And I also, from that place, found a way of telling that story to other people, I think, and, and telling them what I'd been through. And that was the way that the grief kind of came to make sense to me, I think. Yeah, I don't know. I hope that that's helpful, but I would certainly say that my own therapy was absolutely valuable in getting through that period.
And I'm so pleased that you managed to get through and are still, working through such horrible grief. But yes, I've got a couple more questions which are kind of specifically for members of the panel, then some more general ones. So if everyone could forgive me in advance, because I've got so many questions coming in and there's only so much time. But back to you, Anastasia. So a fairly broad question, but where would you suggest to look for information on how companies address mental health?
Yeah, so I mean, to be honest, I'd say that there's lots of organisations now are proud of what they're doing in the mental health space. So quite often it will be things that are on their website. Particularly at the moment, I suppose one of the benefits of the pandemic and the lockdown is that stuff has moved virtually. So actually, there's a lot more accessibility to events and things. You don't have to think about getting to an event after work or after lectures or travelling in somewhere. And lots of organisations are doing things where they like to showcase, whether that's through kind of insight days specifically for potential applicants, or whether more broadly they hold things like panel discussions or speaker events. So if you're interested in an organisation, more often than not, there's sort of mailing lists that you can sign up to, and they'll keep you in the loop with that. To be honest, I would also say that particularly kind of if you are interested in pursuing a career somewhere, LinkedIn can be quite powerful for connecting with individuals from organisations and starting conversations. I would advise against the kind of hi, I like your company, please may I have a job? It, very rarely works like that. Nowadays, obviously, there's recruitment processes and someone can't just give you a job over LinkedIn. However, I would say that it's rare for someone to just ignore you or turn you down if you're saying, can you let me know a little bit more about what kind of things you do in the mental health space? And more organisations have roles like wellbeing leads where there is actually someone who's responsible for that kind of full time, and they are perfect people to reach out to and just say, look, can you tell me more, or where can I look to find out a bit more? And that's what LinkedIn is for. It's for creating those connections and finding out more. Really sorry if you can hear the bangs. There's some quite intense fireworks happening outside my window. But yeah, so in terms of kind of those specifics, definitely kind of go straight to the source. And again, where you can with events like this, or kind of if there's any other ways for you to get in touch with alumni mentors, for example, who have gone on to other organisations, get it straight from the horse's mouth and find out kind of what sorts of things are going on in their organisations.
Great. And that's a really good point about the mentoring scheme, because we have, I think it's hundreds of alumni who mentor for current students and recent graduates. There's bound to be a whole load of them that, at least in some ways are related to the mental health and wellbeing sectors and experience. And even if it's not this applies for both graduates and students, even if it's not a case of committing to something that is more like a six-month kind of more formal mentoring scheme, there's an ask a mentor sort of a byproduct of it, so you can kind of just have one-off conversations with specific people. So I would really recommend that for everyone as well. Right, let's see. I've now got some joint questions, exciting, for Russell and Nhs. So it's a bit of a long one, so bear with me. How did you find clinical experience after graduating? And what route do you take to get to where you are? And then the second part of it is I've done a placement in, forgive me in advance, CAMS or CAMHS during third year. It was cut short by COVID. Was wondering how to continue, especially during this time. I'm not sure if hospitals are still allowing volunteering. So the second part is quite specific and you might not know. But yeah, that's the question.
Go ahead, Nazanin.
Okay. So for what I find is that the first point, I don't know, it might be different for Russell, but from everyone on our cohort, it's a mental health support worker is probably, if you have no experience or a little bit of experience and you just want to gain more clinical work, that would be the first point of contact. It's very rare for someone to go from no experience to an assistant psychologist post. I don't think I've ever really heard of that transition. And then from a mental health support worker, then you can apply for a therapy assistant role, which is an occupational therapist assistant or assistant psychologist or a research assistant. So the point is to first kind of find yourself getting a position. Now, I know that sometimes it's very difficult to get that within the NHS, and I know that there's a lot of agencies out there. I think there's one called Lyme Social Care or Lyme Care. I personally worked for them, and I sometimes refer people to them still. And again, they train you, they do all the required training that you need, and then they send you to different hospitals so that you can gain different clinical experience and you can choose where to work. Again, it's not a permanent role, but it is a paid role, and that could then help you get onto an assistant psychologist post. That's personally the route that I took. So I went from working with Lyme to then an assistant psychologist post. I think I've forgotten the second question, so I'm going to probably stop now because I don't know if I'm going off track or not. But yeah, Russell, if you wanted to add anything to that.
Sure. Yeah, I took a very unorthodox route. So what Nazanin's just described is the way that most of the people on my cohort kind of came to the clinical psychology doctorate. I talked a little bit about this earlier, but I'll go back into it in a bit more detail just because I hoped it might be helpful to a few people listening. I found the volunteering departments at the health trusts really helpful, basically. And I'll go through them again. I ended up kind of through those trusts working as teaching assistant in an inpatient ward in a waiting area of people taking antipsychotics, as a kind of general volunteer in a young person's cancer clinic. And I also did do 1 day a week as an honorary assistant psychologist in IAPT, which is Primary Mental Health Services. Probably helped having that assistant psychologist role on my CV, even though it amounted to a very, very short amount of time. And through all those kind of disparate roles, I managed to kind of scrape together enough experience over the course of a year or two. I also, and this might be worth people thinking about, if they're already in work, I kind of took the role I was already doing, which was as a private tutor, and I just started to move that towards the area I wanted to be in. So I started to work with more and more young people who'd come out of inpatient units or were struggling to stay in education, struggling to stay in mainstream education. If you are struggling to find an assistant psychologist post and they are like gold dust, then certainly consider less orthodox forms of experience. I'd encourage you to do that.
And just to add to that, Russell, is there are positions like you don't have to just search for mental health support worker. There are positions like mental health advocate. There's different types of wordings that they use now. There's like a facilitator, mental health facilitator, wellbeing facilitator. So there's different job roles now that would mean that you still work with people with mental health or within clinical services, but just within a different capacity. And that could always be easier to get than assistant psychologist post.
And the same might go for services that don't have mental health over the door. So, for example, learning disability services, a really valuable experience. Oh.
Great, thank you.
The second question was about CAMS. I'm just aware that we probably skipped over it because we both forgot about it. I don't really feel like I'm going to be able to give much useful advice other than things are completely up in the air at the moment. And I know it's a complete nightmare for anyone that is probably working in services and trying to find experience. We will hope it gets back to normal soon. But the trusts are kind of seems to be on a day by day basis. And fingers crossed you get back through the door soon.
Great, thank you. So now we've got questions that are for anyone in the panel to answer, so non-specific. So something slightly different. If possible, does anyone from the panel have any experience with an unsupportive family, and how, if so, how did you get through it? So maybe Anastasia, given Nhs and Russell have just had long questions.
I wasn't sure why you picked on me there, Hayden. I don't know if there's something that in me that gives off a vibe of unsupportive parents.
Maybe. I know mine. No, I'm joking. Mine aren't. Yeah.
No, of course. My parents are very supportive. However, what I would say is that there is a difference, I think, in awareness around mental health this is a generalization, but generally in people who are older. And also personally, I found that, so you can probably tell from the surname, I'm Russian. I think that kind of culturally, there's maybe more hesitancy to talk about mental health. It's something that is kind of very private. And so, it's not about going and telling people about what you're going through. And I think that that can be similar for lots of different cultures. But on the generational point, I think that we've moved on a lot in the mental health world over the last 10-15 years. So what you'll find now is that in schools, students will have information about well-being and self-care. They'll get to try things like breathing and mindfulness. And so what you tend to get is that kind of younger people now are growing up with a better mental health literacy. But previously there wasn't any of that. And so sometimes I think that unsupportiveness can come from a lack of understanding that we can't necessarily blame people for, because that lack of understanding comes from a lack of awareness and education through no fault of their own necessarily. So I think that if you are experiencing people, whether it's in your family, in your home, whether it's your friends, whether it's colleagues, one of the best ways to try and kind of push past some of that is having the educational piece, is about, arming yourself with statistics. People love numbers because they're hard to argue with. Arming yourself with information about, how mental health is, commonplace across the world. What are the different conditions? How do they present themselves? What do we know about mental health? And I think that sometimes you'll be surprised by, how people can change some of their kind of approach to mental health to be one of a more supportive nature when they do get some of that awareness, and you can help them with that. So I'd say that it is about the education piece. And as I say, kind of with my parents, they're lovely and supportive, but we went on a learning journey together, because I think probably when I was at school, I wasn't quite at that stage where we were taught about mental health. But then, I've got younger siblings, and I certainly see that, they started having it from like year 2 or 3, where they were doing, mindfulness and like child's yoga, which is really cool. I wish I had that. But so yeah, I do think that, give people the benefit of the doubt and think about educating them, because quite often that might be where that kind of lack of support might come from. And it's just because society is changing, and our approach to mental health as a society was very different when those people would have been going through that kind of information absorption stage of their life. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, very much so. And does anyone else have anything maybe briefly to say? Because I'm conscious I've got more questions than we've got time for, but we can move on to the next one.
Could I jump in?
Oh, yeah, cool.
If that's okay. So I got diagnosed with anxiety and depression actually quite a young age. So not when I say young, relatively in comparison to like the bigger picture. So I got undiagnosed in around year 11. And it was a difficult conversation for my parents, because culturally, I'm half black and half Arab. So culturally, from both cultures, this is not something that we talk about, mental health. It's not well-being and all that. It's just not something that we talk about. Sometimes they just say, you know what, just go out for a walk, you'll be fine. And I think something that I've noticed also among like older generation of our generations as well is that they've experienced so much trauma and so much, because my mom's Palestinian, so she's experienced so much trauma during her time, and I think what we find is that they actually haven't dealt with their own trauma, and they just see it as just powering through, and not actually realizing that actually that is also a sign of mental health and things like that. And with myself, when my diagnosis came, and I had a very severe form of depression and anxiety, so I was at a point where I was nearly sectioned, that it was a massive wake up call for my parents, and it was actually a massive learning curve as well, because now I have my little brother who's got ADHD, and they're dealing with him so much better than how they dealt with when I was diagnosed. And it shows like actually they don't give up on your parents. If you find that they aren't understanding the conditions, and don't give up, like try and explain it to them and do your absolute best, because that's what I did. And now like my little brother's got all the support that he needs struggling with ADHD. So yeah, I think that's definitely something. And it's also recognizing that actually your parents have had experiences. I know from my parents, they have had experiences of trauma, but they just haven't challenged it effectively. And I think there needs to be a lot more work done with our parents to make sure that they navigate around that trauma that they've experienced during their lifetime. So yeah, hopefully I worded that correctly.
Yeah, so interesting. The generational and cultural things that you can bring into all this just complicates it even more, but it's great that things are progressing. So let's have a look. So we've got a question well, it's not actually a question. It says, looking at LinkedIn during the lockdown period was stressing me out a lot. I think a wider question is, and I've seen some posts in the chat about the impact of social media, which is obviously a pretty big question. I think to condense a lot of what the chat was about, kind of image and maybe the front that you have to put up online on social media, and what sort of effects that has. So I wonder, it's a pretty broad question, but what are your thoughts on how to, I suppose, manage any mental health and well-being related stresses to social media? And that's for anyone. I can't answer it because I'm rubbish with social media, and I barely bother.
I guess
I could go to Russell.
I think people have to come to their own conclusions, don't they, about where their limits are with social media, and pay attention to whether you think it might be doing you more harm than good. I mean, we are social animals, right? Which is why we lap up social media. We love to know what's going on with other people, but we are also hardwired to perceive social threats, which means thinking that other people might be doing better than us in some way, in the same way as we perceive physical threats. And with this overwhelming amount of information about the social world that we have access to now, I just don't think it's any wonder that that is going to make us feel anxious if we're exposed to it all the time. So yeah, I think, I would wholeheartedly support you taking a break from social media for a while if you think it might be helpful.
And Nhs or Anastasia or Lababa, I wonder if you have any thoughts. I know it's we could probably have a whole session on this, to be honest, but yeah.
I think that was really well said. It goes back down to your personal experiences of it, and getting yourself out of the habit of comparing yourself to others and start comparing yourselves actually to yourself, and how you can work in ways that work for you as opposed to trying to do what works for other people.
Actually, I just thought of one thing. One thing I have done around lockdown time, and I realized because like social media was getting to me sometimes, is that I have a timer on my phone to help me like make sure I'm not on social media for too long, and I have I get notifications of you got 1 minute left, 5 minutes left, and I think that's something that's worked for me. But of course, that doesn't work for everyone. So, but that's something that I've done as a coping mechanism to help me navigate, to make sure I'm not on social media for too long.
Sounds like a really good idea. So I think we've only really got time for one more quick question, and with me as I try to kind of word this, because I noticed some questions coming up in the chat about, I think it's, and forgive me if you've had some of it already, but it's kind of about identifying the early stages of perhaps personal mental health problems. So the question is, when do you realise you need help? You are not over exaggerating about how you feel, and yeah, how do you kind of take those initial steps to kind of self-diagnose or identify those very early stages, I suppose? That's to anyone, maybe to Nhs?
I think just as you were saying that, the thought that came to my mind is, why do you have to get to a stage where you feel like you're in a crisis and then it's okay to ask for help? Why not ask for help when you're struggling from the get-go? I suppose the question of reflecting back for anyone that's thinking this is that actually, what's wrong with me just saying I can't do this at the moment, or I need a bit of support, or I need a bit of guidance? Why does it have to get to a point where we need interventions? And I think when we think about that, actually, from the get-go, as soon as you're feeling you can't do something, maybe talk about it, and maybe talk about coming up with a plan, a structure, something that works for you again. And it doesn't always have to be with a mental health professional. It could be with family. It could be with your lecturer, your seminar leader. It could be with so many different people. But it's just about communicating. But just communicate at a point where you feel as comfortable, as opposed to leaving it to a point where it's unbearable.
I think if I could jump on that again, just about my own personal experiences, I did exactly what Nhs said. I left it till it was a point where I was like, literally, like, thank God I'm here today. And that's what I did. And it was disastrous for my mental health. It was disastrous for my A-levels, because at the time when this was all going on, it was during my A-levels. And I think that's such a valid point. I can't express that enough. Is like, get help when you feel like you need, like, straight away. As soon as you start seeing signs, as soon as your sleep is starting to get affected, as soon as you start overthinking, chest pains, whatever it is, get that help as soon as possible before you let it get to a point, which I did, and it got to a point where I wasn't even eligible to CBT because of my symptoms were so bad. I had to go and go to like the crisis team and things like that. So from my personal experiences, I'll just say, honestly, guys, if you are struggling, get that help now, and don't wait till it gets to a point where you're literally in a crisis team now and it's gotten completely out of your control. So, yeah.
Hayden, can I jump in? I know that we're literally on time for a finish, but I just wanted to say two very quick things which absolutely build on what you said. Firstly, if you're thinking about your feelings in kind of the context of am I exaggerating or not, I don't think that you can exaggerate feelings. You can get into negative thought patterns, but very often when we think I'm exaggerating, it's because you think if I told someone else, how would they react? You are entitled to feel how you feel. It doesn't matter if it's that you're upset that you've spilt your tea or you're upset that you've got a bereavement. Everyone feels emotion in different ways. Let yourself feel how you're feeling. But the other thing that I'll say is that, absolutely building on what Lubaba said, is that, you know, if you think about this as like a physical health issue, you know, if you broke your leg, would you wait until it was falling off to go and see a doctor? No. So the moment that you are starting to feel pain, whether it's physical, it's psychological, it's okay to reach out for help. And reaching out for help with mental health, I think probably, you know, you could argue that the media hasn't helped us with how we think about mental health. It's not that you go straight to straitjackets in a padded room. There are steps to how you seek support, whether that's informal, like Naz was saying, you know, speak to a friend, speak to a family member, speak to a mentor, speak to someone at the university, or if it is starting to get to a stage where you want kind of that more structured support, think about how you can access something like therapy, download an app, whatever it is that you need. But, you know, it don't wait until it gets too bad. Treat it like it was a physical health condition, because honestly, the two should be equal. And yeah, I think that's try and take that away. I think if nothing else, that, you know, mental health is the same as physical health, and we should treat it that way.
Definitely, that's a really good point to end on. So, yeah, we could carry on and on. We haven't even tackled lockdown 2.0 or the American election bonfire night. There's all sorts going on. But a huge thanks to all four of you. It's been very, very insightful, very personal, anecdotal, and lots of practical and useful advice as well. So huge thanks, and a huge thanks to all of the students, alumni, and any staff who were there, or sixth form students, for all your lovely questions and all the support you're giving each other in the chat. So I think we will leave it there.